Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Grace Holland. Today we're focusing on climate risks for homeowners in North Carolina. With recent events like Hurricane Helene catching many residents off guard, it's really important to understand how climate change is impacting our homes. Joining me is WRAL's climate change reporter Liz McLaughlin. Liz, thanks for being here.
So good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let's get started with the issue of flooding. Zillow says this is a top concern for many home buyers. Flood maps published by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, which we all know, are the benchmarks that determine which homes are in a flood zone. How accurate are those maps?
So many of the scientists that I spoke with consider those FEMA maps extremely outdated. And thousands of people in our state are living with the consequences now, right? Because they say they were blindsided by the recent flooding in western North Carolina. There's just a significant discrepancy between the FEMA flood zones and updated models that take climate change into account. So a recent study by First Street Foundation, which is a nonprofit that specializes in climate risk, found that nearly 12% of homes in North Carolina are at risk of flooding. That's significantly higher than the 4% of homes located in FEMA-designated flood zones.
Okay, and so how did these maps get to be so outdated? Is it just FEMA being behind on the science?
So they actually have really good engineers, but they're only allowed to include storm surge data and main river channel runoff into those maps, and those are guidelines from many, many decades ago. As we saw with Helene, there are many other factors at play here, including how rainfall events impact streams and other smaller waterways, and our stormwater management is just not equipped to handle extreme weather. Warmer air also holds more moisture. So with rising temperatures, 1 in 100-year floods are happening more like every 10 years. One data scientist I spoke with from Deep Sky, carbon removal company, said there's been something like 300% increase in precipitation. Development also plays a role here because it's changing the way water is moving, and the flood maps just aren't keeping up with that.
Okay. And so how can people find out about the real risk that they have to their specific property if those FEMA maps aren't really the best guideline?
The good news is it's getting easier for people to access that advanced modeling. Even when I started here a few years ago, it was really clunky just to try to find that information. I mean, I'm looking at binary code on UNC researchers' computers. But now First Street is working with real estate sites to include that information in listings. And I spoke with their head of climate implications research, Jeremy Porter. Zillow just launched a feature, and I'm going to pull it up now. You can see wildfire risk now, heat, air quality, wind, and flooding. You just scroll to the bottom of the listing and you can see it all. You can see it in depth. Go in if something has a high rating. This one has like 7 out of 10 for wind, 9 out of 10 for flooding. It's one at the coast. And you can see how many times this property is flooded. 4 since 2001, it says on here. Or if there's been significant windstorms, looks like 31 at this property. So that's something I'd want to know if I was buying a home, right? You can even see insurance recommendations, so you can see how much that will cost and factor it in before you buy it, or maybe you don't want to buy it. And there's even projections 15 and 30 years in the future. That's the common length of fixed rate mortgages. Redfin, Realtor.com, a couple of others also incorporate this data now.
Okay, so that sounds like some pretty comprehensive data that folks can use. But what's the best way that homeowners can use this? I know you mentioned if you're obviously moving into a home, then okay, maybe it affects whether you decide to move into it. But people may already be in their homes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's unfortunate because the FEMA maps really dictate guidelines and building codes in a lot of communities. And, as we've been talking about, they really underestimate the risk. So it's really important for homeowners to be informed, especially about flood risks, even if they're not in those flood zones. Really, knowledge is power here because there are some things that individuals can do as well. You can strengthen your roof, trim back trees, say, on your property if you're in a wind-prone area. And yes, wind risk is changing because of climate change. We've done a couple of stories on that, even inland here in Wake County. And all that data can really just help guide insurance decisions, as we saw with Helene, and just across the state, less than 2% of people have flood insurance. And really raise awareness about long-term risks.
Okay, let's take a quick break right there, and we'll be right back. Liz, before the break, we were talking about how homeowners can use this information, and another big piece of this is insurance. People think about that a lot with homes. So what does this all mean for their insurance? I know a lot of folks are already seeing their prices go up.
skyrocketing in some cases, Grace. And insurers, by the way, have already had easy access to this very updated data, maybe ahead of homeowners. So they've already been incorporating that into their pricing. And that's something many homeowners have been surprised by, and buyers. Maybe they didn't put that in their budget. And higher home costs can translate to more defaults. This is already affecting people's lives, already affecting industries. And insurers are deciding in some areas that it's just too risky, and companies are pulling out. We saw it first with places like Florida and California, but it's already happening in North Carolina too. Recently, Nationwide chose not to renew 10,000 policies in the state. And it's not just at the shore, inland too. I was talking to a church in Cary that lost their insurance policy and had to find another one because of climate-related reasons, the insurance company cited. And as far as cost, shared risk could really help the premiums go down. Right now, because only 4% of people are even in flood zones, the only people really getting flood insurance are the people who are in really high-risk areas, so the people who have to get it. So they're people who need it, the flood companies are often paying out to, so it's making it more expensive. So kind of sharing that risk could kind of help that go down. And, billion-dollar disasters are just soaring, and basically more and more people are living in harm's way. So it's not a zero chance that the insurance industry could see a big change, maybe even a collapse in coming decades.
Wow. So let's shift from that to coastal issues. We've been talking a lot about these homes in Rodanthe that keep collapsing since 2020. 10 of those homes have been lost due to erosion, which is more than that part of the beach is losing 15 feet annually. Can you explain how rising sea levels and other climate risks are impacting our coast?
Yeah, so I go really in depth on this in a story that's coming up. But a report from the state and federal agencies in North Carolina shows that hundreds of buildings are at risk on our coast, at risk of being claimed by the ocean. And that risk is constantly changing. So something that was on the report, there are likely even more structures today that weren't included in that. And it's just so easy to look at these homes on the Outer Banks, for instance, and say, why would you live there? But, I spoke with some of these property owners, and in some cases, there was a whole football field of beach in front of their home when they bought it. And the homeowners say their only option is to move it or tear it down, and there might not be a place to move it. They might not have the money to do that often, and the insurance company won't pay out until it falls. So they just are watching and waiting until they fall in the ocean. Obviously, that's a problem, right? Debris is spread across 20 miles of beach after that. There's rusty nails sticking out of the sand. It's expensive. It's dangerous. And there's just no easy solution, though. One option, beach nourishment, that we see in a lot of places. They're harvesting sand from the ocean, dumping it back on the beach, costs tens of millions of dollars, and it's temporary. One big storm can erase $10 million just like that. We saw with Buxton a few years ago. Buyouts is another option. There was a pilot program with the National Park Service. They bought 2 homes in North Carolina, but that really limited funding. And federal buyouts often don't come until after disaster,
right?
Like a hurricane. So there's no easy solution, but sitting idle is what we've been doing, and I think that might be the worst option.
Yeah. And so what are the projections for sea level rise and its impact?
I've listened in on a bunch of Coastal Management Commission meetings in the state, and their modeling's really jarring. Just looking at the line at places like Emerald Isle, Bogue Inlet, it's not just the beach going away, it's going into development. And there's a 30-year risk line, a 90-year risk line, and it is cutting in. Wilmington has seen 7 inches of sea level rise just since 2010, and that's more than twice the sea level rise from the 3 decades before it. So it's accelerating, right? And the projections show 1 to 2 feet of sea level rise by 2050, not that far away. It doesn't help in Wilmington. The land's also sinking, so it's happening faster. And the implications of that we're already seeing. High tides flooding into streets. Septic tanks, septic systems being overwhelmed. So raw sewage mixing in with stormwater systems going into people's pools, into the ocean, into waterways. That's affecting, seafood, everything. Water quality, public health. Communities just really can't afford not to address this.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Liz, for sharing your insights today. Stay informed about climate risks as they relate to real estate by heading to WRAL.com and clicking the Climate Change tab. And thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.